This is a fictional mindbender. In the Boondocks, everyone is written and portrayed to represent some aspect of black culture or something that affects it or is adjacent to it to a satirized and extreme degree. In this case, Grandad, I think, represents the black boomer generation, or rather how that generation was seen by later black millennials. At least is how creator Aaron Magruder interpreted that. To Huey, Grandad is this perplexing mix of respected elder from a generation that created his revered heroes, a passive sellout, and a self-delusional elderly man who thinks he can still be relevant to the modern world while still holding on to the values that his generation fought against in the first place. Yet Riley sees Grandad as an occasional obstacle to his own goals, but is more often than not his partner in crime. In fact, if anything, Grandad is more like Riley in that they are both somewhat selfish and looking for the easiest path to get by in life. Through this lens, we see how younger black people also may see their elders as somewhat being hypocritical, while at the same time them being unabashedly and having zero shame about living a good life in the burbs, at least those who are able to get out there. Grandad comes off as seeing his grandkids, the Freeman brothers, as unwanted burdens that he did not ask for, living under his roof and by his good graces. All this while one actively disapproves of nearly everything that he does and represents, and the other is a hoodlum wannabe, but at least he's a hoodlum wannabe that spent a lot of time enabling him. And despite all this, Grandad still takes care of them, and at the same time, on several occasions, does demonstrate that he does love his grandchildren. This represents the conflicting prism that both the civil rights generation and the greater generation that were minorities fell under by the time of the turn of the century. That they were often depicted as these heroes of a bygone era that, through their sacrifice, gained all the benefits that their descendants now had access to. But now, by the time of the 2000s and 2010s, were under scrutiny because that fire of revolution and change seemingly had long gone out of them, instead choosing to settle into the very system that they were fighting against back in the day. None more represents this, I think, than the episode with Martin Luther King if he had survived his assassination. That essentially, Grandad's generation felt disrespected by the younger generation, who didn't appreciate what they had, and at the same time also disrespected them because it saw the younger people as being willfully lazy and ignorant, not willing to work and basically trying to use them as cash cows that they could just suck the money from so they didn't have to work for anything. And all the while, Grandad's generation also wanted to be seen somehow as being still relevant, even to the point of embarrassing themselves in the process. However, the Boondocks, in its typical genius, puts a nuanced spin on this as well as time went on, showing that even the literal black and white perceptions of how black boomers were perceived is not entirely true and not always hypocritical as well. This is shown when Grandad confesses to his boys of his struggles of loneliness and not having a partner, even willing to pay out for a short-term relationship with a hooker just not to feel that way, and all the while knowing full well what she was doing, manipulating him and trying to lead him along by the nose. And all of this being much to the chagrin of the Freeman boys as well, because they thought Grandad was being his typical ignorant self, embarrassing both himself and them by having a relationship with a younger woman who was just using him and him not being seemingly aware of it. Not understanding that Grandad was entirely aware of what was going on, but it met a need that he felt. And this also shows how the modern race issues of the double O's and 2010s didn't, according to the show anyway, weigh as much on that particular generation as it did Gen X and millennials, because they believed that they were past that point now. They had made the sacrifices and worked very hard to get to where they were to live the good life. After years of struggle, they earned it, while their grandkids did not. And all the while, at the same time, having to deal with some of the younger generation looking at them not as inspiration and as heroes as what they're kind of expecting of what they could be, but like I said earlier, as cash cows waiting to be used up when things go bad and that they can just fall back on when life gets hard. There are other aspects as well to that generation that the show plays on through other characters, but I'm going to save that for later. But for all his faults, Grandad also represents a very positive aspect of that culture to Black culture overall, and that was a very big deal to Gen X and millennial urban Black communities, that of a strong familial structure. For example, it's easy to get the impression that the Freeman brothers may have got off pretty easy with their parents before they moved out to Woodcrest. Though Huey is relatively well behaved, he's still an armed and outspoken revolutionary who speaks his mind whenever the hell he wants. And Riley seems to be able to do and say whatever the hell he wants and believe that he's not going to have any consequences in the process. I think Grandad's influence in their lives puts a strong measure of discipline and checks those temperaments, and is also not worried about being shamed into feeling bad about it. That he applies discipline where they need it, whereas it seems like anyway that for whatever reason, perhaps their parents didn't. And this perhaps is the most important aspect to Grandad in his relationship with the Freeman brothers and what he represents to them. Whatever issues the brothers may have with Grandad, neither can deny that he cares about them and will discipline them in a way that helps them to focus on their goals and won't allow them to get distracted. And we see this as the show progresses. Huey, rather than just espousing general ideas of Black revolutionary politics and Black rights issues, now starts to actively get involved trying to do school programs and even do armed protests whenever he can, so that he's actually living out his goals rather than just talking about it. And Riley also starts to make his dreams of being wealthy and rich basically come true, either trying to associate with said peoples who seem to be successful even though they also want to be gangsters, as well as trying to run his own business with the whole fundraiser thing with the chocolates and becoming very successful at it, showing a very strong business acumen, whereas charisma of being able to bring in people and share his vision is extremely effective. I don't think any of this would have happened without Grandad's influence in their lives, or for that matter, if the boys had not lived in Woodcrest at all. But let me know your own thoughts below, and this is the Fictional Mindbender. Have a good day.